Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander, and we'd like to talk to you about freedom of thought. In metaphysical philosophy, we say so often that we live in our minds and not in the world, and indeed we do. And each and every one of us has absolute freedom as to the way that our mind operates. We may not think so, but in fact we do. And the way that we think about circumstances and situations truly determines the quality of our life. We are absolutely free when it comes to our mind, aren't we, Iris?
We totally are, but as you said, so many people think they don't have that freedom because they don't claim it for their own. And there's been a saying going around for the last few years, 5 years or so, take back your power. Mm-hmm. And that would be one way of doing it, because we can just do what you just said, realize that we do have autonomy in our way of thinking, and no one can tell us what to think and not think. Mm-hmm. So and we need to also remember to give other people that same privilege, because so often we think that we have to monitor people's thoughts and tell them what to think.
Right. And as we are cautious of our own thinking, we are able to control how it is circumstances and situations are affecting us. Yeah. And I'm kind of, I shouldn't say I'm amazed, because I'm not really, but there are many people, most people believe that circumstances and situations are totally out of control, and certainly many are in our lives. Many things that happen in all of our lives are out of our control. But the way that we think about them, the way we respond to them, those are totally within our control. Mm-hmm. And we're conditioned through a lifetime, regardless of whether we're young or middle-aged or older, we're conditioned through a lifetime of thinking that we cannot change our way of thinking about things. And in many ways, we're trained and brought up to think in a certain way. And I'm thinking about the fact that, you know, we have the idea that certain things are bad and other things are good. And so if we get sick, that's a bad thing. If we lose our job, that's a bad thing. If we have a relationship problem, that's a bad thing. If we have a lot of money, that's a good thing. If we're healthy, that's a good thing. And so we have this idea of what's good and what's bad. And in fact, our lives are filled with a combination of those things that we perceive as good and those things that we perceive as bad. But the way that we respond to them in our thinking really determines whether they're good or bad. Because bad things can happen in our lives, and then out of those bad things, good things can come. And one of the greatest things that can come is our awareness of our own ability to cope with circumstances and situations, to deal with challenges, and also to step a little further, which in this half hour we'll get into, stepping into the creative power of our thoughts, because our thoughts do indeed create our environment. And that's not to say that everything is created by our own thoughts, because we do have to understand that there is a collective consciousness, and that the thought processes of those around us are also creating the circumstance and situation and creating what's happening in life. So we can't control all of the externals, but we can control 100% of the internals, can't we?
Yes, we think of that poem, The Man with the Hoe. Bowed by the weight of centuries, he leans upon his hoe and gazes at the ground, and so forth. And that's one way of thinking, because that man that's depicted there is so earthbound. So the poem says, it could be that that man lived a glorious life mentally, and his thoughts just soared. We don't know. Mm-hmm. But we cannot judge other people, and we shouldn't. But as we exercise our own freedom of thought, then we give others this freedom of thought and assume that they're thinking great and glorious things. And as we assume that they are, then the energy would help to lift them to think in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts really make things.
Yeah.
Thoughts are creative. And one of the analogies that we use is that everything in our lives, everything in this world was thought before it was created. The chair that we're sitting on, someone thought of this chair, and then they drew a diagram of the chair, and then someone designed the chair, and then someone manufactured the chair, the television, the camera, all of those things. Everything in life was thought before it was manifest. And if we look at creation itself, we know that we were thought, we as individuals and we as planet Earth, the physical plane, were thought in the mind of God. Yeah. So we came out of thought, and we are creatures of thought. That's a part of our constitution. And so the creative power of mind is something that many of us don't understand and don't grab hold of, because mind can create everything. Mind can indeed create heaven and hell. And in fact, the kingdom about which Christ Jesus, from the Christian perspective, spoke, had everything to do, the entire kingdom teaching is about the thought process, how we think and how our minds perceive where we are and what we are and who we are and where we are in the experience that we call life.
Yes, and when you said thoughts or things, if we can just take that and think about it for a moment, we can see how we, in our own environment, in our own work field, and work field meaning in the home or in the public place or wherever it is, that as we think things through concisely and use our own freedom to let our thoughts soar, then we live a different life, and we live a much more rich life.
Mm-hmm. Or we live a defeated and deflated and painful and hellish life. And so many of us do that. And there are certainly times when we're going to be challenged, and we're going to be hurt, and we're going to be lonely, and we're going to be dejected, and we're going to be depressed. All of those things, all of the negative aspects of life are going to visit all of us. But out of that, we can transform our way of thinking. And by transforming our way of thinking, we can bring ourselves out of the circumstance so that the circumstances and situations of life don't have control over us. And even in the face of apparent negative experience, we can really be very positive and affirmative and grow out of that experience.
Yes, and we say so often, and we hear so often, we live in the time of greatest change the world has ever known. So we realize that without change, the good can't come. Mm-hmm. We can't claim our good because we don't allow it. We're staying too strong on the straight and narrow, and we're not just really accepting the good that could be our own. And as we look, you mentioned that we do counseling a great deal, and as we look at the people whom we counsel, they're always fighting some series of change, a big change, or a series of changes, and that's why people seek counseling, and rightly so. Mm-hmm. So those ones are really taking charge of their life by thinking things through. But we can also exercise our freedom of thought without seeking outside help, just on a day-to-day basis, and it makes all the difference in the world in how we live our lives.
Mm-hmm. And we can do it just by a process of self-examination, which is a wonderful process that we all need to be constantly involved in, and that is examining ourself and our way of thinking. And if we find ourselves being a person of negative nature, or of a negative nature, we should be assured of the fact that we can change that,
yes.
And that we can change the negative way of thinking. And we also can, in this process of self-examination, look at how it is we respond to those around us. Mm-hmm. And most of us, unfortunately, respond to those around us by agreeing with them. Mm-hmm. And so if we're surrounded by people who tell us the world is terrible, and that the times are awful, and that they're going to get worse, and on, and if we agree with that, and if we acknowledge it in our own way of thinking, in our own thought process, and we become a part of it, then that creative force is set in motion. And so we become one with that negative thought process that's around us. And so if we see ourselves being surrounded by people who have negative thought processes, and if we see ourselves as having negative thought processes, then we can identify the fact that we really need to change our way of thinking. I'm thinking about a time several years ago. I was on a bus in a airport. I was going from the airport to where the rental cars were, and I happened to be going to do a funeral, and so I happened to be wearing a clerical collar, which I don't do a lot, but I had a clerical collar on, and there was a man with a woman on the bus who was just a very unhappy person, and he was just talking about how terrible the city was where we were, how terrible the weather was, how terrible the economy was, how terrible everything was in general. And any time the lady that was with him said anything somewhat remotely positive, well, he beat her down, not physically, but with his words, and said, "Oh, that's crazy." And then he looked across the bus aisle and saw me, and he said, "Oh, and you you probably think everything is all right. And so his thinking was that because I was a member of the clergy that I would think everything was all right. But it has to do with the fact that his acknowledgement there was that my way of thinking was probably different than his way of thinking, although he seemed to be very satisfied in his negative way. But that negative way of thinking can become so much a part of who and what we are. And then it can create for us a very, very miserable existence, a miserable environment. And then we, in turn, spread that to those around us. And unfortunately, we spread it also to the young around us and those who are impressionable.
Or people don't want to be with us, and then we're alone and truly lonely. And so many people say, that's just my luck. With my luck, it's something negative. And that's affirming. And we know that affirmation really has power. So those people who affirm the negative aspects of life are really going to get that, aren't they?
They are. And as they affirm that, it really becomes a part of their life. And then they begin to say, oh, this is the way it is for me.
Yeah.
and that's sad. And, so sad. It's a little bit like the person who says, oh, I never have fun when I go to parties, so I never go to parties. Well, of course, they're never going to have fun when they go to parties because they've already decided before they go to the party that they're not going to have fun. And guess what? They're not, because the power of thought is so dynamic and so much a part of them that they are really articulating, or their verbalization is clearly identifying how negative their thought process is. And that's one of the red flags in the self-examination program, when we could say, oh, I have a problem, and I need to really work on the freedom that I have to think differently.
Well, if we take advantage of our alone time and let our thoughts soar, we reap wonderful rewards by doing that, because then we can see more clearly possibilities. And there's always potential and possibility to every situation. We just have to accept that, yes, this is possible, and yes, we're going to accept it.
Mm-hmm. That's tremendously important, that there is a possibility and there is guidance, there's divine guidance in every circumstance and situation. And you're absolutely right in pointing out that if we are able to acknowledge that, then we've made the first step. And we are thereby acknowledging the fact that in every difficult time, in every painful time, in every loss, in every hurt of our lives, if we allow our freedom of thought to be present and in our mind's understanding to tell us that there will be a way, and if we can calm our confusion, and if we can calm our busy minds that are going in 100 directions and focus simply on the fact that we need to be guided and directed. One of the things we say so often when people face life challenges is that we need to stop, we need to calm down, we need to take a deep breath, and we need to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we will be divinely guided in the direction that we should go in the midst of this circumstance and situation. If there isn't enough money in the bank, if we're faced with an illness, if a relationship's ending, if anything's happening, we've lost a job, then we need to step out of that negative experience. Not deny it, but step out of it. And as we step out of it, allow our minds the reassurance of that affirmation to affirm the fact that the presence and power of God, that divine intelligence combined with our intelligence, will guide us and direct us in what we ought to do. Now, what we ought to do may mean we need to get another job. It may mean we need to move. It may mean we need to change our circle of friends. It may mean that we need to change our way of thinking. And we need to be open to that. But as long as our minds are so confused and are going in so many directions and are not focused, then we're really going to have a tremendously difficult time in the midst of these experiences.
That's correct. And as you enumerated the possibilities that would be open to one, the one of changing your attitude might be the ticket. Because if we go along in life thinking this is a terrible job and I'm being taken advantage of and I don't like the people I'm working with, or any negative things, and it becomes a habit, then there's great unhappiness there in that work. But we have freedom of thought to just change our way of thinking and see the good in it. And there's always good in every circumstance. So if we see that good and acknowledge it and honor it, then what seems like a tedious job might turn out to be a very pleasurable one.
Yeah, then life becomes a positive and affirmative experience. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you.
would like to offer you the opportunity to receive one of these free booklets to further your understanding of the New Thought message of confident living. Each month we will feature a different booklet, which will be mailed to you free and postage paid. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807.
Before the break, you made a wonderful statement, and that is that there is good in every experience. And I think seeing the good is really a part of training our thought process, isn't it? To see the good, even especially to see the good when it's not apparent.
Yes, to see the potential, because there's all kinds of potentials in every circumstance. And so we have the potential to learn, to grow, to help others, to do a better job, to be more relaxed. We have all the various potentials of life available to us all the time. And freedom of thought changes our potential into possibility.
Yeah. We have limitless potential, don't we? You know, and part of what metaphysics teaches and New Thought teaches is that we have limitless potential, and that limitless potential is accessible to every one of us, and it doesn't require us to go to a special church or to have a certain faith or anything. It transcends all of that. And some way our thought process has been damaged by our belief that we need to do certain things in order to get the good life. We need to do certain things in order to be successful, to be prosperous, to be healthy, to be happy. We need to do certain things even to have a relationship with God, when in fact, we don't need to do anything to have any of those things. We are empowered and strengthened and limitless because of who we are, and we're all children of God. And that's true for all of us, regardless of where we come from, regardless of what our faith is, regardless of what church we go to, regardless of what race or nationality. Everyone is a child of God, and everyone has limitless potential. But the experience of that limitless potential is limited only by our way of thinking and by the limiting effect of those around us who tell us that it is limited. And unfortunately, there are a lot of clergy and a lot of churches and a lot of psychologists, a lot of sociologists, a lot of school teachers, a lot of parents, a lot of husbands and wives and people in relationship. There are a lot of neighbors and employers and coworkers who are willing to tell us what we are not and to convince us that we are not who and what we know that we are. And we spend our whole life and our whole ministry and our whole counseling work trying to help people understand that they are limitless and that that limitless potential is accessible to every one of us if we simply align, as we say, if we align our way of thinking with divine mind, with divine thought. And we think that Christ Jesus was the exemplification of that in the Christian tradition. We think that Eastern leaders were that in their tradition, and that a lot of non-spiritual people have been able to demonstrate that reality. And of course, from our perspective, we find in our Western faith, through New Thought Christian faith, a good way to express that, but it's in no way limited to us.
And when people are self-limiting, then they take away from their own personal enjoyment of life ever so much more. I know two ladies, I was just thinking, I know two ladies who don't like to eat out, and I can't imagine anyone not liking to eat out. I mean, think of all the possibilities that you don't have to do the dishes, you don't have to plan the menu, you don't have to do a lot of things, but they don't because they say I can eat much more cheaply at home. Well, that may be true, and it may not be true, because in the restaurants they buy in large quantities, and then you can, and it depends on where we go, and also what we order. And there was one lady that I felt if she would go out occasionally, she would have a much more broad look at life, and she would be happier because she was very pessimistic in her life. And she had a heart condition, which I felt was augmented by her attitude, and we know that does that all the time. So I would encourage her to go out, and she would always say, well, I can't, I just can't afford to do that. And I'd tell her, well, then just go out and have a cup of coffee and a piece of pie, have your dessert out. And because it does something for us to change our pattern. Whatever the pattern is, it's uplifting and energizing to change the pattern and get a new one going, isn't it?
It is to embrace the reality of change, to do things differently, to get out of our ruts, and also to enlarge our circle of connectiveness to other people. We can never be around too many people, and we can never be around too many new people. And I think of one person in our fellowship who's an older lady, and she mentioned to me a very good comment. She said that as she got to be 80, and she's well into her 90s now, and she said, when I got into my 80s, all of my friends were dead except for very few. And she said, I didn't intend to die, and I was healthy and vibrant. And so she said, I decided I needed some new friends, and I needed some younger friends. And so she said, I made a whole new group of new friends, and some of those are dying now. And so I'm continuing to make new friends because, of course, is much older. But being willing to do things differently, to have a larger circle of friends, to go out to eat, to make a trip, to walk around the block, to talk to someone that we haven't before. You know, so many of us are afraid to talk to anybody.
Yes.
And certainly there are imprudent times to talk to people, and we wouldn't encourage people to simply go wandering around, but common sense will allow us to seek out and be around people. And just as you had said with the lady that wouldn't go out, by changing our behavior, we can so often change our way of thinking. And when we're in a rut or a very negative mindset, sitting at home, watching the television, eating on a tray, doing the same things the same way we always did them is simply not the way to bring about change in our way of thinking or in our life. And we need to be willing to change, and we need to be willing to get out of the habits that we have. And traditions are great, but you know, traditions are also a two-edged sword. And so often traditions and habit create for us a very unfulfilling life. And so I think we need to cherish certain traditions and certain habits, but we need to be cautious of being rigid, and we need to be cautious of not being open and receptive to doing new and different things.
Yes, and we can think of the possibilities that exist outside our narrow horizon, and then flow with those and be flexible. Because when we get in a rut, we're just totally inflexible. And the fluidity and flexibility in our lives bring great joy and change, and a joy of living that's not there when we don't think with freedom of thought.
Being fluid and flexible, as you said that, I thought those are beautiful words, because we think of people whose bodies are fluid and flexible, and of course that has to do with youth and vitality, but our thoughts need to be fluid and flexible, don't they?
Yes.
And so often we have rigid thoughts. We have ideas about this is right and that's wrong. This is okay and this is not. And so often those things aren't true. And one of the things that we have said in talks that you've heard me give so often, I say, you know, that we think that an empty checkbook or limited financial resources is bad. But in fact, limited financial resources can be great, or bills coming in are tremendous, because bills mean that we have something in life. And so we need to look differently at these aspects of life, because we know that there are a lot of people in life today that have no bills, and they're standing on street corners and are homeless. And certainly we wouldn't want to change where we are for that, although some of us, maybe that would be a good change too. But we need to be open and flexible so that we're not making judgments about ourselves and others, so that we're simply living life in a positive and affirmative way. And when circumstances and situations present themselves that are foreign or different to our way of thinking, we need to train ourselves to say, isn't that interesting? Instead of saying, isn't that awful? Or if we hear someone saying something negative about the world or conditions or someone, to think rather than challenging that person, but rather than thinking, oh, isn't that true, or I agree, thinking, isn't it interesting that they think that way? I wonder why they think that way, because I don't think that way. And this process of being fluid and flexible in our thoughts is really an empowering one. And I think that's a great topic. I think I'll give a talk on that.
Good. Well, when we're so much more happy. And also the people around us are happier too. Because when we stay so rigid, it makes everyone else fall into little categories. And when we stay flexible and fluid, then the people around us are able to bend. And very often families hold each other back. And I've seen this in families where they don't want certain family members to reach out in the community. They don't want them to be a part of a greater faction than their own family. And it's so limiting that when we limit ourselves, it's pathetic, but when we limit other people, it's really sinful.
It is sinful. It is, and sin to us is error.
Yes.
And it's a big error. It's a big
Yes.
mistake. Yes, it is. And we need to understand that in some instances when we're in that environment that we need to make a change, you know, and that's hard. And that's not at all encouraging people to walk away from relationships or family or friends, but there are times when we need to understand that that these negative people cannot be so much an influence in our lives. And what happens often, and what we tell people in relationship often, or we tell children, young people, you don't leave your home, obviously, and you don't divorce your husband or wife, but what you may do is surround yourself with other people who are more supportive and who are able to fill that void that you're not getting at home, and understand in your intimate circle that there are circumstances and situations that brought this one to that way of thinking, but not be a part of it.
Yes.
And let that person have their thought, their freedom of thought. They're free to think as they think, but to choose not to think that way. And sometimes we don't need to tell the person that because there's nothing to prove. It has to do only with us.
Yes, and we can also advise people and do it and in our own lives to find a church that we like if they don't go to church, or to just try various ones and see what they come up with, or to read something totally new and different. If they've never read about the angels, then read about the angels. If they've never read about foreign travel, then read about it. But just to change the horizon will very often be a very loosening of that limit that people put on themselves.
And interact with as many people as we can.
Yeah.
You know, I think that is enlarge the circle. Make the circle bigger and bigger, and allow yourself the joy of freedom of thought, freedom of association, and freedom of life through knowing and loving more people.
Yes, and enjoying those others, because I know my husband used to say, you have more information about someone in 3 minutes than I get in 3 days. Well, it wasn't that I was prying, it's that I really like hearing people's lives and hearing their stories and hearing what they do. And as you listen attentively, then it's enlightening for them because they see their potential more clearly as they discuss. And that's a service that we can give others, and it's a very wonderful aspect of life.
Absolutely. And as we listen to them and as we send out our positive thoughts for them and envelop them in prayerful light and prayerful consideration, then wonderful and positive and affirmative things happen. Dr. Freelander and I have been talking to you about freedom of thought, and we invite you to examine the way that you think, the dynamic of your mind, and hopefully you are totally and completely free. If not, you have that potential. We hope that the information that we've shared with you has been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Mike and Iris would like to extend a cordial invitation for you to join them this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for our weekly celebration service at the beautiful Seaport Marina Hotel at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and 2nd Street, adjacent to the Marina Pacifica and Marketplace shopping centers. You will experience the musical talents of Ms. Denise Dumeyer. There will be a guided meditation, prayers, spirited music, and a dynamic, life-changing New Thought message. Please join us this Sunday. You will be warmly welcomed into the company of like-minded, positive, and uplifting people. And remember, whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can attain it through confident living.